feel free to go ahead and come up with your reply. And like I said, you have 50% chance of getting the answer right, and you have 100% chance of learning something new. So please go ahead, don't feel shy, don't worry about whether the answer will be right or wrong, right? Just go ahead and put in your reply. So today we are going to continue with chapter number 2. Yesterday we discussed the first part. Yesterday, if you remember, we gave the title as Sankhya Yoga, right? And if you remember, I also mentioned that this specific chapter, Srila Prabhupada titles it as The Contents of Gita Summarized. So I'm going to write that title as well. The Contents of Gita Summarized, right? So, and by the end of this session, you will know why this chapter is so special, why this chapter is called as the Contents of Gita Summarized. Okay, very quickly, if you remember, we began this specific chapter from text number 1 to 10. We discussed about Arjuna's indecision, right? We discussed Arjuna's indecision, and then we discussed from text 11 through 30. We discussed about this whole Sankhya Yoga, the science of soul, the whole body versus soul philosophy, right? And if you remember, with this section, Krishna refuted Arjuna's first argument of false compassion or bodily compassion, false bodily compassion. Right? Then we discussed from text number 31 to 38, we discussed the philosophy. Now, technically it is called as Sakama Karma. I didn't use that term yesterday, but today we'll introduce this term, Sakama Karma. So, if you remember, Krishna used the argument win-win because it's enjoyment in both the cases. He countered Arjuna's argument of loss and loss, lose and lose, right? In both way he thought he's going to lose, and Krishna countered that argument by saying it's win and win for you. That way it's going to be enjoyment for you, right? And that enjoyment was basically to fulfill your desire. So kama means desire, sa kama means with desire. So this is karma, where you're engaging in action, the attached engagement, that the term that we used, that is the technical term for it is sakama karma, where one is engaging in one's actions out of a sense of desire to enjoy the results of one's actions, like that. So this is where we stopped. And now Arjuna then raised the third argument, if you remember, the third argument of fear of sin. Fear of sin. And this argument we are going to discuss specifically today, how Krishna counteracts this specific argument, right? And the section, in one of the most important sections of the Bhagavad Gita, where we are going to go from text number 39 all the way till text number 53. And in this section, Krishna is going to talk about something called as Buddhi Yoga, or Buddhi means intelligence. Somebody who has Buddhi is intelligent or smart. So we will call it as the smart yoga, right? So what exactly is smart yoga? So if you look at text number 39, so now Krishna is going to shift gears. So he says, thus far, Eshate Abhihita Sankhye. So thus far, I have described this knowledge based on Sankhya. Remember the word Sankhya? Sankhya means the path of Jnana, the path of analytical study. So that's how Prabhupada translates this. Thus far, I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now, listen as I explain in terms of working without fruitive results. O Partha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from such bondage. Buddhaya yukto yaya partha karma bandhanam prahasyasi. So when it says Eshate Abhita Sankhya Buddhi Yoga Imam Shrunu. So now I'm going to talk about the process of Buddhi Yoga, the smart yoga. And by doing so, free yourself from bondage of work, right? So now, yeah. Okay, yeah. So now, if you remember, the other day we spoke about the Vedic path being twofold, right? So the Vedas mainly present this twofold path of attached engagement, and there was the path of detached disengagement, right? So this path of attached engagement is something that we saw from text number 31 to 38 of this chapter. And then this detached disengagement is what Krishna began with, the Jnana section, the body was a soul philosophy. We saw that. So now he's going to give us the hybrid path of detached disengagement, or rather detached engagement. How do I still involve with this world and still not get affected by this worldliness, right? That is what he's saying here, that now so far we spoke about this detached disengagement, but now listen in terms of working without fruitive results, right? And then he's going to glorify this path, saying that look, this detached engagement process is such a powerful process. Even if you make little advancement in this path, it will be a multiple lifetimes benefit for you, because you will carry forward what you gain in this path. You will never lose. Like for example, in our modern education, in this lifetime, even you may be a PhD, but in your next lifetime you have to start from your basics, you have to start from your ABCDs, right? But whereas this process of detached engagement, Buddhi Yoga, is such a powerful process. The impressions that you impress upon yourself in this lifetime, the samskaras that you create for yourself, are so powerful that in your next lifetime you start from where you stopped. So if you have like achieved 50% progress in this lifetime in the spiritual journey, then the next lifetime you'll start from 51%. That is how you can say eternal the benefits are of this process of Buddhi Yoga, right? And then he describes that how this whole attached engagement process, this sakama karma process of fruitive mentality, looking for results, trying to enjoy your results. Though if you remember, I mentioned this also, how 90% of the Vedas, they talk about this process, and only 9% talk about this, and a small hidden 1% talk about this detached engagement. So the bulk of the Vedas, 90% are talking about this path of attached engagement, but that is something for the less intelligent people. The really intelligent people, they still engage with this world, but out of detachment. And I'm going to talk about that 1% secret path that the extremely rare souls, they take up to, right? And then he very beautifully describes that Trigunyo Vishaya Veda Nistraigunyo Bhavat Arjuna. So majority of the Vedas, they deal with these three gunas. That 90%, just like the metaphor given is like that of a jackfruit, right? If those of you have seen jackfruits in India, right, the outer, it has such thick outer shell, and then once you open it, inside there is so much of the fruit inside, which, or the inner part of that jackfruit, which is not edible. It's only the inside kernels which are useful, right? So literally, if the size of the jackfruit is some 5 kilos, the effective fruit that you get of it is 10%, maybe only 500 grams. So like that, majority of the Vedic texts, they talk about this kind of attached engagement. Now some of you at this point may be looking down upon the Vedas, thinking, what nonsense are these Vedas? Why are they misleading us? Why are they misdirecting us. If 90% of it is of the inferior path, why are the Vedas misleading the society? Well, understand that the Vedas are also ultimately coming from the Lord, which means there has to be some utility for this 90%. What is that utility? Understand that if you look at again the broader Vedic wisdom, so here you have the highest path of detached engagement, then you have the detached disengagement, and you have the path of attached engagement. But many people, even to come to that path of attached engagement, is also a great advancement, because most of the time we live a very animalistic life. What do I mean by an animalistic life? Meaning a lifestyle where we do not follow any rules and regulations. There is no any sense of discipline in our life. We just let our senses be the principles of our life, or gratifying our senses be the main principle of life. Right? For somebody living that kind of an animalistic life, coming at least to some level of discipline and following the Vedic path of attached engagement is a great advancement. So it is not right to look down upon even that section, the karma section of the Vedas, because compared to an animalistic, atheistic, moralless, misguided life that unfortunately we see a lot happen in the modern society today, compared to that, following the process of attached engagement is a great advancement. But Krishna, understanding that Arjuna is even beyond that stage, he's a much, much, much more mature spiritualist. Krishna says, look, Arjuna, majority of the Vedas are just talking about these three gunas, but this process of detached engagement, that Buddhi Yoga that I'm going to talk about, is something beyond even that. So, and now after having described this, he says that now I will talk about this very, very special process of detached disengagement, engagement, the Buddhi Yoga. And he's going to define this Buddhi Yoga, right? So the Buddhi Yoga is going to be defined in three very, very important verses from text 47, 48, and 49. Krishna is going to define the process of Buddhi Yoga. And this is how he says. In text 47, he says, the very, very famous verse, Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karmaphala heturbhur mate sangostha karmani. What does it say? You have a right to perform your duty. So 47, he says, you have a right to perform duty. You have a right towards your duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your action, but you have no right to the results. Fruits of your action means basically the results of your action, right? And never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached. And don't be attached. Basically, have no attachments. Now, this is a very, very sophisticated philosophy, and may seem like a little tough philosophy. I'm supposed to be performing my duty, but at the same time, I am not supposed to be attached to my results, right? How can I work in that kind of a detached way? Some of us may be wondering, because if you look at our day-to-day life, modern life, our impetus in life is the end result. Like, why do I go to work? Because I get salary at the end of the month. Why do I go watch a movie? Because I think that movie is going to give me some enjoyment. Why am I eating this particular food? Because I'm thinking that this food is going to give me some enjoyment. So definitely we are interested in enjoying the results of our activities. So what does this mean? To perform your duty and in a complete detached way, right? This may seem like a very bewildering situation, right? And not just that. Then in text number 48, Krishna elaborates more. He says, Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddha asiddha samo bhutva samatvam yoga muchyate. He says, Yogastha karmani, that when you are doing this kind of fulfilling your duty without any attachments, perform your duty in an equipoised way, samatvam, and abandoning all attachment to siddha asiddha, success or failure. Such samatvam yoga muchate. Such yoga is called such equanimity is called yoga. So he defines yoga here as that being in a sense of equanimity, right? So indirectly is hinting that without this internal, that yoga of equanimity, we will not be able to work. It's the, working without attachments or working without attachment to the results is not a theoretical concept. It is an inner state of being, which when manifested externally, it manifests as this detached engagement, right? And then he further talks about in the next in text 49, he says, durena hi avaram karma buddhi yoga dhananjaya buddhau sharanam anvicha kripanaha phala hetavaha. O Dhananjaya, O Arjuna, keep all these abominable activities far distant by buddhi yoga, or through this kind of this smart yoga, and in that consciousness, buddhau sharanam anvicha. Sharanam means surrendering to the Lord. And in that consciousness, when you surrender to the Lord, that is how you'll be protected, right? On the other hand, if you want to act with attachment, that is like a very miserly state, because a miser means always wants to hold on, cling on to the fruits of one's action, right? So with this mood of devotional service, of surrender in devotion, you can protect yourself and engage in this detached engagement mode, right? Now let's look at these three verses again and understand what does it exactly mean, right? So let me take a new sheet now. So this is sheet 1. Okay, so the first, you have a right to perform your duty, so which means clearly action is involved. There has to be action. It is not like what Arjuna wanted to do, where he wanted to give up his work, he give up his action, give up his duty and go into the forest. There is action definitely involved. However, you have a right to perform your duty, but you're not entitled to enjoy the results of your action. You're supposed to be detached. And understand, detachment is the result of knowledge, right? Which means your actions have to be grounded. They have to be grounded on the platform of knowledge, right? So this is not just ordinary action. These are wise actions. So when you call an action wise, when that action is not just whimsical, it is not just as an instinctual, but rather that action is coming out of mature knowledge, when the base of that action is knowledge. And finally, third thing he describes is that the mood, while all of this is happening, the mood is that of surrender and devotion. Surrender to the Lord, or the mood is that of devotion, right? So now, to put together all these terms, right, this is how we're going to define buddhi yoga, and I'm going to give you a very mathematical definition of what buddhi yoga is. So this is how we can rewrite what buddhi yoga is. Buddhi yoga is karma, action, but on a solid foundation of jnana, with the mood, like what are the internal thoughts. This is like one of those thought bubbles that you'd have seen in comics, with the mood and intention of bhakti. And there you go. So you have action, knowledge, and devotion. This is the integration that Krishna is talking about. right? This is our integrated yoga, where Krishna has combined all the teachings of the Vedas. Vedas talk about karma, Vedas talk about jnana, Vedas talk about bhakti. But look at Krishna's brilliance. He has put everything in its right place, right? We are not interested in only action, we are not interested in only knowledge, and neither are we interested in only devotion without any knowledge and action, right? Because ultimately the devotion also has to translate into some tangible action, right? So there has to be an action component, a devotion component, and knowledge component. So this is how Krishna performs brilliantly this integration, and he presents, and he, being the expert marketing guy, he gives a nice brand name also. He calls it a smart yoga or buddhi yoga, because Arjuna wanted to be smart. He thought jnana was being smart, but Krishna saying, no, 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 jnana is there, but I am going to give you a much better path, a smart yoga path, right? Because within the word yoga, now again, little background, the word yoga means to connect, right? Yunjate. And specifically throughout the Bhagavad Gita, we will see the word yoga takes multiple meanings. Here, specifically, Krishna uses the word yoga in this chapter and in the next couple of chapters, till chapter number 5, in fact, with the intention that we are still connected to this world. See, this is the Gita philosophy. Gita philosophy is not a socially disconnecting philosophy, but rather it is a very socially integrated philosophy. Krishna didn't want Arjuna to leave this world and practice spirituality in isolation. The spiritual path that Bhagavad Gita gives is a very socially integrated path, right? And that is the beauty of Bhagavad Gita, that even today in the modern society we can practice it. We don't have to become ascetics like in the great rishis and munis of the past, who just go to the Himalayan forests or some other mountains and caves, and they would engage in spirituality to attain perfection of life. No, you don't have to do that. The Gita philosophy is such a socially integrated philosophy that even if you're a warrior like Arjuna, where you have to do some really gruesome things, or even if you're a doctor or engineer or a simple housewife or a student, you can practice the philosophy of Gita and attain the same perfection. The same perfection, I repeat, of what the great sages living in the caves in the previous ages would attain. One can attain the same perfection. That is what makes the Gita philosophy so special. Why? Because you are getting the best of karma, the best of jnana, the best application of bhakti, all integrated in one powerful package, right? And that is what the specialty of this buddhi yoga process, right? Now, to highlight this, this buddhi yoga in a much better way, I'd like to give you another metaphor, right? Think of this entire our own spiritual journey, right? This is the journey of our life, and in any journey we need a vehicle, right? So this is the vehicle of our life, right? And for this vehicle, right, we have three important components. There is the outer body, the structure, right, of the car. Right, here you have the structure, the entire seats, the chassis, the bonnet, the entire outer shell of the car, etc., the axle, wheels, etc. All of that is the outer structure of the car. Then you have the engine. You have the engine of the car, which is the main prime mover, right? Without that engine, your car cannot run. That's what is giving the power for the car to move ahead. And finally, very inconspicuously, there is one small little important detail, which is the steering wheel, right? The steering wheel, right? Now we'll try to understand how these three components of a car are so important and how they are connected to this definition of buddhi yoga, and why the integration is so important, right? The outer structure of the car is the most useful part of the car. That's where the utility of the car is defined, right? Now, this outer structure of the car, the utility part, is the karma, the actions that we perform in our life, right? Ultimately, we all have to have some utility to the society, and that is, and how are we useful to the society? Through our actions. That is the karma part, that is the outer structure of the car, right? And the engine, but then it's not just about doing, right? So this outer structure, karma, basically defines to you in your life what to do in your life. What to do. Your what's of life gives a structure to your life. I want to be a scientist. I want to be a social reformer. I want to be a poet, right? I want to be a musician. So that what do I have to do? The tangible, perceptible action is the what of your life, right? And many times we put a lot of effort in the what. If you see, literally our entire educational system is training us in terms of the what's of life, what to do things, what are all the options that you have in your life, so you can discover. It kind of helps us in that, right? But then there's another aspect also, which is the engine. The engine is the jnana, the prime mover. That is what is the force. All those cylinders, as the pistons, as they are moving, right? They are creating the push for us to move ahead in our life. And what this jnana does is, the what is defined by the karma, but then how do I do what I need to do is what jnana tells you. That's why jnana is such an empowering thing. If you're only, okay, you decided, okay, what do I need to do? I want to be a poet. That's good. But then how do I be a poet? Then you need training. You need to, you need some kind of a knowledge system. You need to expose yourself to some training in a perfect knowledge system. That is a how of your life, right? And that is what is going to drive us ahead. That's the engine that will push us ahead, right? But then the whats and hows are very clear. But what if you're steering? What do you think that is defining? That is the bhakti, which is giving you a purpose of why. Why am I driving the car in the first place? The goal of life is not to buy the car and tune it very nicely, tune the engine very nicely, maintain the whole body, polish the body very nicely, and every day, like a ritual, you take this car out and go around in circles all day long, right? So that is not the purpose. Of the purpose is you reach your destination, right? It's not about how expert a driver you are, or what clarity of thought you have in terms of how much you want to drive, right? It's not about how much I want to drive, how passionate am I to drive, right? Discovering that, yes, is one important part, right? But that is not all in all. And just learning how to drive is also not all in all, right? The destination, why am I driving? Where, what is my destination? Where, how do I reach? Why is the whole journey happening in the first place, right? Where do I need to go? Knowing that is the important aspect. That is the purpose, and that is what the bhakti, the why, defines. So Krishna is trying to integrate this, giving this integrated understanding to Arjuna, that don't be just stuck with this what's and how's, but when you add that why component, your actions will develop some sense of maturity, and with that maturity comes detachment. So in this way, you are engaging with this world, you are engaging with your duties, you are engaging in your actions, but you are still detached. Why? Because your purpose is very clear. You know that you are engaging in this work for some higher purpose, not to just be like a miser trying to enjoy those results, right? Specifically in the bhakti tradition, these what, how, and why have very, very specific terms, right? This what is called as seva. Seva means selfless service. Selfless service, right? The how, the engine, indicates what is called as swadhyaya. Swadhyaya, swa means self, swa means self, and adhyayan means study, right? So swadhyaya is self study. Does not mean you take book on your own and study on your own, but actually swadhyaya means study of the self, studying oneself, right? So studying oneself, study of the self. That is what swadhyaya means. And the why is called as sadhana. Sadhana here means, uh, you know, disciplined, dedicated, consistent daily practice. You know, disciplined, because the word dhatu means whenever it's like firm, rooted, and that rooting comes through discipline. Disciplined, consistent, spiritual practices, daily practice, spiritual practice, right? That is what is a sadhana. And how these three things are so important in a sadhaka's life. Sadhaka means a spiritual seeker's life. It is very important that we find balance in all these three. Now let's try to understand how these three are all important, right? If I only have seva and no swadhyaya and sadhana, but let's take the first scenario. I'm only engaging in service, right? Which means I'm not taking care of the engine and I have no clue how my steering wheel is working. What do you think is going to happen? Very soon, your car is going to stop, right? There is only seva, which means there's no fuel in your engine. There's no petrol. You're not constantly feeding yourself. Courses like these are part of swadhyaya. You are feeding your engine with lot of petrol, a lot of fuel, right? So that you're giving yourself fuel for thought. How do I look at myself? How do I look at my own life? How do I approach the problems of my life, right? If you're not feeding the engine, then very soon you will run out of fuel and your car will stop, your spiritual practice will stop, and you'll be stalled somewhere along the way, right? And what if I have seva and swadhyaya but no sadhana, right? Then what happens? I'm engaging in service, right? I'm also fueling, I'm also studying, I'm also fueling, but my steering wheel doesn't work. So what will happen? In the first case, at least your car would stall in one place. Now you are like a misguided car. You will go around, you will meet with an accident, you will hurt yourself and may probably hurt others also. This is what happens if practitioners become slack in their sadhana, right? Because over the years, because see, your seva is what that is visible to people focus on that. And swadhyaya, sometimes, you are forced to attend some courses, you end up doing that. But sadhana is a very personal thing. Nobody's going to come and check that. Nobody's going to come to your house every day and see, are you doing your daily disciplined, consistent spiritual practice? Nobody's going to check that. And because nobody's going to clap you for that, sometimes we may lose our motivation to engage in that sadhana, and things will become slack. And that is a perfect recipe for a disaster, an accident to take place, right? How about another scenario where your swadhyaya is very good, your engine is very good, right? And your sadhana is also very good, right? But then your seva is zero, meaning you have a fantastic engine, you are a great driver behind the wheel, your steering is also under control, but your car is falling apart, your life is falling apart, your tires are punctured, the windshield is broken, the spring in the seats is coming out. So there's practically no use for that car. You cannot serve anybody else. You can sit in the driving seat and probably reach to however far you can drive there, you can reach there. But when the outer structure, when we don't create a proper structure and framework for our life, then there's no utility for our life, because that seva is what is very important, right? That is also another scenario, right? And there's another scenario where your seva is good, your sadhana is also very good, but your swadhyaya is very bad. And this is a very common scenario with many spiritual practitioners, where due to whatever peer pressure or sometimes of their own personal interest, they like to engage in service, and they are sincere, they are very meticulously to whatever best of their ability they are engaging sadhana. But somehow, study of scriptures, this is also boring, complicated, and I fall asleep during classes. I don't feel like studying books, and I'm done with, even I was not a good student during my years in school or college, right? So I don't feel like studying Bhagavad Gita or any scriptures. So they become slack in their swadhyaya, which means what happens? You have a very beautiful car and you're driving very safely also. You're a very good sound driver, right? But as you're going along the way, someday suddenly your engine will stop. And you're wondering, why did it stop? Why did my spiritual life suddenly stall? Why am I not feeling the taste in my spiritual activities? I used to enjoy them so much when I started out. Why? Because when you started out, you heard something, your engine still had some fuel. But now, as your journey proceeds, you ran out of fuel, your engine is falling apart, the pistons are no more working, right? There's no fuel, everything is gone. So your engine will very soon stop. And that is a very common, at least in my little experience over the years, I have seen this is a very, very common problem with seasoned practitioners who do not spend sufficient time in swadhyaya. Their journey stops and they start feeling like, how come I am sitting here and nicely the steering seems to be moving, things are going round and round. Our meditation is going round and round. Our seva is also going very nicely, right? But somehow you feel like, hey, I'm not making any progress. I feel like my journey has stalled, right? That's the reason why, because we haven't given this kind of a balanced approach to our spirituality, right? So these three aspects: structure, the engine, and the steering wheel, the seva, swadhyaya, and sadhana, karma, jnana, and bhakti, all three are important for us, right? And when we have this kind of a balanced approach, and this is the integrated yoga approach that Krishna is offering in the Bhagavad Gita, right? And then he continues further, saying that, look, Arjuna, that once you are in all your years, whatever philosophy you have heard, you only heard about the previous two popular paths of yoga. You heard about this, the process of attached engagement, or maybe you would have seen some examples of some great souls practicing this detached disengagement. But when your intelligence comes out of this whole 99% of the cloud of the forest of the Vedic instructions, you will discover that 1% secret and powerful technique of this integrated yoga, of this buddhi yoga, and which is such a powerful yoga that if you practice this, you will never face any difficulty. Because, oh Arjuna, you are not ready to completely give up this world, and neither are you in the right frame of mind to act in this world. So here is the procedure I'm going to give you, where with a cool headed, with a balanced head, you can still continue to engage in your work, without getting affected by your duties, right? So this is the path of integrated yoga that Krishna gives. And when Arjuna hears this, he finds this like, this is too good to be true. How does this work, right? And then he asks some amazing questions, right? In text number 54, right? Now we move on to the next section, where from text number 54 till the end of this chapter, till 72, Arjuna is going to ask about how does the smart yogi work. Earlier we had the smart yoga. Now, how does a smart yogi, how does he function, right? And he's going to ask a very cryptic question. We'll try to, I'll first tell you the question and then we'll try to decrypt it, right? So this is what Arjuna asks in text number 54. He asks that Arjuna Uvacha, Sthita Pragyasya kya bhasa? So the smart yogi, the technical term is called Sthita Pragya. Sthita Pragya. Sthita means firmly fixed, very fixed up, and pragya means wisdom or smartness, as we used here, right? So how is that person who's so smart, such a smart yogi, right? Arjuna wants to know about them, and he's going to ask this question. First thing he asks is, what are the symptoms of such a person, right? How does he speak, right? What is his language? How does he speak? What is his language, basically, right? And how does he sit? And how does he walk, right? Now, this question may seem like, what kind of a crazy question is? What do you mean? What language? Is Arjuna interested in understanding? Does he speak Sanskritam, or does he speak Hindi or French or Arabic, or what exactly is Arjuna intending here? So these are very cryptic questions. By speak or language, indirectly Arjuna is asking, how does such a person conduct? How does such a person conduct himself or herself in one's life? What are the external signs? What are the external symptoms of a person? How does such a person in general deal with one's life? And how does one sit? Sit here indicates, in the course of dealing with one's life, sometimes one also has to restrain oneself. It is not that you're always pressing the accelerator, right? Sometimes you also have to press the brake. So how does one restrain oneself? Right? And finally, how does one walk? Right? Walk here means, how does he interact with this world, or use one's senses? Interact with senses and sense objects. Because such a person has to deal with this world, which means all the the sensory allurements are right there in front of such a person. So how does such a person interact with one's senses or use one's senses, right? Now this is a very, very powerful question. So indirectly he really wants to know the inside out of such a sthita pragya, or such a smart yogi, right? And this is how Krishna, he begins the description of such a person. So in text number 55 to 57, he talks about the general symptoms and answers the first part. So let's note that down. So in 55, this is going to talk from 55 to 57. And how does he sit, right? That he describes from 58 to 63. And in general, how does he respond to sense objects? Is going to talk from 64 to almost the penultimate verse of this chapter 71, right? So very quickly, let's try to see this very, very profound section of the Bhagavad Gita, right? So first, let's understand his language. How does he conduct oneself in one's life? He says, "Oh Arjuna, when a person gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arises from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in that pure consciousness. Such a person is not disturbed." So this is the language. This is how one conducts in one's life. Such a person, is not disturbed mentally. This is the external conduct of such a person. Not disturbed mentally, despite the threefold miseries coming to. So it is understand, spirituality is not, it is not that suddenly your luck is going to change. I'd like to narrate a small story in this regard. Because when we read this section of the Bhagavad Gita, it's always a very bewildering. What do you mean by engage but still be detached? How can I even do that? And I thought, if I'm detached, I lose my motivation. How can a person be motivated while still being detached? And these are some of the questions that may be lingering in your head. So I'd like to narrate a very nice anecdote. a good friend of the eco village. He's a very famous person. His name is Mr. Jason Lewis. So he had visited the eco village many years ago. He is famous for having, he's a Britisher who's now settled in America. And he became famous for setting two Guinness records. The first record he set was because he's the first human being to cross the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere from the coast of Spain all the way across to America. He crossed it on a pedal boat, right? Pedaling all the way across the entire Atlantic Ocean. Imagine, on a pedal boat. So him and his friend, two of them, they did this together. And his friend was happy setting one record, but he continued further, circumnavigating the entire planet, which means he did an entire 360 of this planet on human power alone. Pedal boat, kayaking, cycling for most of the time on land, hitchhiking, walking. That is how. And it took him about good 13 years to do all that, because he was funding his own expedition. Wherever he would stop, he would work, earn some money, continue further, like that. And this person, he happened to visit the eco village, and long story cut short, he one time he actually told how Bhagavad Gita played a very important role in his life. So he was explaining that how this one time when he was crossing the Pacific Ocean, so he decided to go somewhere from the southern tip of North America all the way across to the Fiji Islands or the Canary Islands, somewhere, the Fiji Islands, right? So he wanted to go across there. So from one end of the world map to other end of the world map, as you see normally, right? So when he figured out somehow that's the shortest water route. So he wanted to do that to minimize his effort. And somewhere midway along the way, what happened? His pedal boat started encountering counter currents, which means as he was trying to move forward, the waves were pushing him back. And now when you're in a pedal boat, you can't keep traveling continuously, right? He has to take rest. So he would pedal for 16 hours in a day and get some good 8 hours of rest. Now what ended up happening is, during the 16 hours, whatever ground he covered in those 16 hours, the waves would push him back in those 8 hours of his sleep. And it went on for good 7 days. He was wondering, hey, why do I feel like I'm stuck in the same place? He was not able to move ahead. And this happened back and forth again and again and again. And then when he realized that, oh my God, I'm running out of my water supplies, I'm running out of my food supplies. If this continues longer for, indefinitely, then that's it, I'm gone. And he did it at a time when he didn't have any satellite phones or anything. He had a very low budget travel expedition, So then he thought, what do I do? I think this is it. I'm gone. I'm dead. I'll be buried in the sea very soon. And at that moment of his greatest despair, of this words that we just discussed earlier, text number 47, Karmanyevadhikaraste, you have a right to perform your duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your action. This verse very strongly came into his head. And when this verse came to his head, he determined, yes, this is what I need to do now. Then suddenly he entered into a mode of detachment. He said, forget the Guinness record. Forget even my family and friends who are waiting for me on the other side to receive me. Forget all the media reporters and all the attention that I'm going to get once I reach my destination. I need to focus only on my duty and not on the result of my duty. And in that state, he said, my duty right now is just one thing: left pedal, right pedal, left pedal, right pedal. That's it. And he said he entered into some kind of a pedaling samadhi, very intense, focused state of pedaling, right? And now see what happened. Nothing changed, huh? The waves didn't change. The direction of the waves did not change. But what did change is that because he was able to focus better, free from distractions. Earlier, imagine if he would do, say 10 miles ahead on day one, and then he would come back by 10 miles. Now he would do 12 miles on day one, but the water would pushing back by 10 miles. So he would effectively cover 2 miles on day one, then 4 miles on day two, 6 miles, 8 miles. And like that, it took him 3 weeks to to cross that counter current zone and ply himself to safe waters. And then he continued this journey, survived, and lived on to tell this amazing story, right? So this is such a powerful story. It goes on to tell you that actually many times in life our attachments are the things that weigh us down mentally. They create that mental blockage. So to be free from attachments is actually not becoming free from motivation, but rather to be free from attachment means to be free from all distractions. And you will see, because we are not used to operating in that mode, many times we find it too difficult to believe and to practice. But just for once, I encourage you to try this, right? Just try to be, don't worry about the how you are going to enjoy your action, but just focus on your action. Put your full effort that yes, this is what I need to do. Bring yourself in the present and don't live in the future that okay, I'm going to enjoy some result, and then you'll see, oh, then what if I don't do it well? Then if I don't do it well, I'll not get the result, I'll not get to enjoy. And that is the anxiety, that is the unnecessary anxiety that we burden ourselves with in life many times. Just the prospect of missing out, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, is the unnecessary anxiety that we put ourselves in, but rather what Krishna is encouraging here, Arjuna, is that don't put yourself with that unnecessary anxiety. Just focus on your duty in the present moment, and then you will see how liberated you will feel, how free from anxiety you will feel, that you will just focus on what needs to be done and not on unnecessary. Your mental energies will not be unnecessarily be spent in addressing those anxieties of unnecessary anxieties of life, like that. So that is why such a person is not mentally disturbed, because they know that action is what is in my hand. Whatever comes next are just my mere attachments. Just think about this, a very profound statement. Real spirituality is spiritual action or detached action or devotional service or seva, whatever terms you can connect with, is something that you do in that present moment. While you are doing it, you are enjoying it. That's it. Once you have done, whatever remains later on or whatever you are trying to cling on to, that is your attachment, right? And this clinging on to is what Krishna wants Arjuna to give up, right? Because that clinging on to is what that is going to give you unnecessary anxiety in life. Because such a smart yogi doesn't cling on to things, they are not mentally disturbed. That is the conduct of such a person, right? And for such a person, happiness, distress, attachment, fear, anger, none of these exist. They are just equipoised. When I say happiness, it is not that kind of a peaceful happiness, but rather I'm going to say like that kind of a passionate happiness. They are neither too disturbed with happiness nor they're too disturbed with sadness, like that. So then he continues further. How does such a person sit? How does such a person restrain oneself? Right? He says that he gives the example of a tortoise. What does a tortoise do? The moment it senses some danger, it just withdraws its limbs inside its shell. Just like that, when a smart yogi sees that, oh, here is some allurement coming, here is some distraction coming, here is that situation coming which I know in the past has triggered me, right? So whenever such a person notices that there are either people, objects, or situations which can potentially trigger me, the moment one senses that, one stays away from them, right? This is how one turns inward. This is the point, how one turns inward. In the yoga language, it is the pratyahara, which means to withdraw one's senses. This is how one turns inwards, right? But then, see, understand, turning inwards is not an easy activity, because why are we first of all turning outwards? Let's understand that first. Why do I turn outwards? Because The soul by nature needs to experience some pleasure, some happiness. In fact, the reason why we look out to doing things or experiencing things in life is because we want to experience happiness, and that is the innate nature of the soul. You cannot refrain from experiencing that. The soul wants to experience pleasure, and that's the reason why we look out. We look forward to good food, we look forward to meeting interesting people, we look forward to traveling. Why? Because the soul wants to be happy, right? And somehow it is looking things outwards. But if the soul really wants to turn inwards, there is a secret. It doesn't happen by artificial restraint. Sometimes, some days it may work for you, but trust me, if you pin your entire life hopes on this technique, you are going to be royally embarrassed very soon, right? So don't think that merely by artificially restraining your senses you will be able to protect yourself from all these triggers. The secret to turning inwards, Krishna explains in text number 58, in text number 59, he says, Vishya vinivartante niraharsya dehina rasavarjam rasopyasya param dishtva nivartate. The embodied soul may restrict from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remain. This is very important, because externally you may be restraining your senses. Some of you may be fasting today, right? But then constantly, if your mind is thinking about food, then what good is our fasting, right? Rather, the taste for sense enjoyments remain, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste is fixed in consciousness. So this turning inwards, it only comes through the higher taste. What do you mean by higher taste? Taste in something more deeper, something more sublime, something spiritual, something devotional, right? That is why in our bhakti yoga, buddhi yoga definition, there was karma and jnana. Technically, karma and jnana alone will externally help you to achieve that detached engagement, but for you to sustain it for a long duration, you need that higher taste, and that higher taste comes through that bhakti component. That is why if you notice in our diagram here, there is externally you will see karma and jnana, but internally there is this mood of bhakti, right? And this bhakti gives you that higher taste. That's why this integration is so very important, right? And therefore in that line, Krishna continues further that see, Arjuna, understand, this senses are not so easy, right, to control, but for one, tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matparaha. Matparaha means one who keeps them under full control by fixing one's consciousness upon me. So indirectly, what is this higher taste? Krishna is indicating that by fixing your consciousness on Krishna, by fixing one's awareness on Krishna or consciousness on Krishna, or in other words, by becoming Krishna conscious, right? Then one will be able to, in fact, the whole purpose of this fixing your consciousness of Krishna is to develop that higher taste. And that is how we can really genuinely turn inwards and act like that kurma, act like that the tortoise that we spoke about, like that. And then warning Arjuna about the danger of uncontrolled senses. Very, very beautiful words from text number 62 and 63. Krishna is going to give a very interesting side point. He talks about this whole very amazing analysis of the human mind, very amazing analysis of human psychology. He explains what is this whole, when I use the word trigger, right? Now these triggers, they happen at multiple levels. Some of us can identify them early, but some of us, maybe at a later stage. What are these different stages in which these triggers come to us? So he talks about this whole cycle of triggers, right? Let me write this down. The cycle of triggers, or the chain reaction of triggers, that would be a better term. The chain reaction of triggers. How do I identify these triggers? So first thing Krishna says, dhyato vishayan pumsam. Dhyana means contemplation. The first trigger is contemplation, right? The moment you start contemplating, there itself the trigger begins. You're already at that point. You're already thinking of just like that's how the whole modern world of marketing works, right? They want you to contemplate about their products, because what happens after contemplation? Dhyato vishayan pumsan sangasteshu pajayate. From contemplation comes attachment, right? Clearly, many of us, we think that, oh, I already have these attachments, right? But attachments don't come on their own. We harbor those attachments because we are constantly contemplating on things. So the first trigger level is contemplation. But somehow if you miss that trigger, then identify the next trigger. Am I getting attached on something? How do I know that? Right? Do I start craving? When the attachment comes, sangasheru sangat sanjayate kamaha. How do I know if I'm attached to something? I'm only desiring of that. The moment desires start coming, you understand, oh my God, I'm getting attached to this, right? So that's another trigger we can identify, right? So contemplation, attachment, desire. But what if I don't rectify even the desire state, right? Then sangat sanjayate kama, kamat krodho vijayate. And desire comes, many times, we don't have the opportunity to fulfill that desire, and that frustrated desire leads to anger. And the thing is, moment we devolve to the stage of desire, we have already deteriorated to a very lower stage. Because the way desires unfortunately work is, if I fulfill desires, I'm going to develop greed, and that will lead to more desires. I'm stuck in one cycle there. Or if my desires don't fulfill, then I'm going to become a victim of anger. And once anger comes, krodhat bhavati sammohat smriti vibraha. So one becomes bewildered. One gets angry, one develops bewilderment. And one is bewildered, one loses one's sense of discretion. One's intelligence is lost. And once loses one's intelligence, one just commits some really serious abominable activity and falls down. And anger is such a dangerous state to be in. Sometimes we are not in control. Many years ago I read this case study, and this happened in India. This happened in Mumbai, where this couple were in a very heated argument, and the husband, in the fit of rage, he just picked, they had a very young baby in a cradle. In the fit of rage, he picked up that baby and threw the baby out of their balcony. And he didn't even realize, and once he realized, the most abominable action that he has performed, such a grave sin that he has performed, he couldn't handle himself, and he jumped from the balcony and committed suicide, right? And this poor woman, now she lost her husband and she lost her child. What kind of a great harm. So anger is such a dangerous thing. We are harming ourselves and our loved ones around us, right? So we have to protect ourselves. So these are the important triggers that we need to identify, my dear friends. Ideally, at the level of contemplation itself, try to hold on, control your triggers. If it doesn't happen, the moment you start sensing attachments, how do I know that attachments? The frequency of thoughts. You have to start engaging in activities that are trying to give you some positive activity, some positive engagement or higher engagement, like that. Because moment it comes to a stage of desire, then it's like you already have contracted the disease. So you have to be very aware of these things, like that. So then, after having described this, then Krishna continues further by describing how does such a person walk. So this is the last section of this chapter, right? And he says, how does such a person walk? Again, very, very beautiful. How does such a person engage with one's senses? He says, Ragadesha vimuktesu vishyan indriyas charan atma vishayar vidhe atman prasanam adhikachati. So very nicely, how does such a person engage one's senses? Because after hearing the previous case study of triggers, you may say, oh my god, I don't want any triggers, let me just close my eyes, let me again go back and hide in a cave. No, again, that is not the Buddhi Yoga philosophy about hiding in a cave. You have to engage with your senses, right? How does such a person do? Such a person, it's described, free from all attachment and aversion. Understand, attachment and aversion, both free from attachment and aversion. Right? Please understand, attachments we understand are definitely detrimental. Even if you hate something, even if you're averse to something, attachment is the other side of aversion. They are two sides of the same coin. Right? Try to understand. Just like sometimes in life you may meet some people or situations which you may be averse to, right? But such aversions are nothing but your own attachments coming back to you in a different form. Like I'll give you an example. Suppose, let us say you are a foodie and you like to eat good food, right? But then turns out today you are going to a party and somehow they are serving food which you can't eat. Like, say for example, there is a meat and some non-vegetarian food there, and you don't want to eat that food. But then at one level you have attachment. If you work on base of your attachments, then you'll indulge and end up eating whatever is there. But if you're acting at the level of aversion, you are hating that food. You're internally telling yourself, oh, I hate this food, oh, this meat is such a it is such a sinful thing, or it is such a detrimental thing for the planet. These people are all, not only will you start hating the food, that hate in your heart expands. You'll start hating the people also, and you start hating that place, right? And at a certain point you start hating yourself for being there, and you'll ruin the whole experience of whatever the purpose for which you went there. So understand, attachment and aversion, there is no difference. Both disturb your mind. But imagine, before going to that place at home, peacefully, you have nice heavy dinner, and then you go there. Because your stomach is full, you're already experienced a sense of fullness internally. Even when you look at that food, you are like, it's okay, I'm full, I'm already satisfied, I don't need anything. I'm neither craving for it, nor am I despising it. You are in a more peaceful state. So understand, even aversion and hatred is another side of attachment. So such a person neither is engaging with this world out of attachment, nor does he engaging with some kind of a grudge or hatred or aversion. Rather, one is engaging through some regulative principles of freedom, right? Regulative principles of freedom. Basically, they operate under certain regulations. So with some kind of a disciplined actions, like that. And when such a person, when they act, they are so peaceful in their mind. And this very, very beautiful verse comes, when one is not connected with the Supreme, one can neither have transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind. And without there's no possibility of peace. And without peace, how can there be any happiness? Right? Because one is internally connected to a higher source, right? Such a person does not experience that kind of a disturbance that way, like that. So yeah, just a second. Yeah. So exactly. So such a person, because one is connected to that kind of a higher source, one's mind doesn't get disturbed, and that is how they are able to conduct themselves. So understand, again, I'm repeatedly emphasizing, this whole process of internal detachment is not an artificial repression or some kind of an artificial restraining. It comes through a deeper spiritual attachment, or if I may put it in other words, real material detachment comes through spiritual attachment. right? So this attachment is not material attachment, it is spiritual attachment. So when you are spiritually attached, then we can be materially detached. That is a higher taste that Krishna spoke about in the previous section, right? Like that. And then he continues, and such a person, he is described that apuryamanam achalam pratishtam, such a person who is not disturbed by incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, but is ever being fulfilled, but is always still, can alone maintain peace. So the example given is such a person is like a still ocean. You will never see an ocean dry up in summer or become overflowing in the rainy season. The ocean always remains at the same level. That is the example given, right? So like that. So that is how Krishna ends this chapter, saying, a person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship, nirasha, nirmama, nirahankara, sa shanti madhigachati. Such a person alone can attain real peace. Like that. And when one remains like that, in that internally grounded, peaceful, remember, sthita pragya, that steady, grounded state, such a person at the time of their death, at the end time of their life, such a person will attain the higher state, will attain the transcendence, enter into the kingdom of God. Saying so, Krishna completes this whole presentation of the Bhagavad Gita, right? However, there is something very interesting that is going to happen now, right? So why this chapter, remember I said I'm going to explain why this is called Contents of Gita Summarized. Krishna in this chapter gives a very crisp understanding of what he wanted to talk about, this detached engagement, this crux Gita philosophy that he wanted. Krishna gave a very crisp understanding. Because Arjuna did not understand, Krishna wanted to elaborate further. He needed to elaborate further. So this definition of karma yoga, this definition of buddhi yoga, Krishna is going to elaborate further. How does he do that? Look how brilliantly Krishna is going to do this now. Because Arjuna did not understand this whole integration of karma, jnana, bhakti, he is going to divide this topic, this subject matter topic by topic. And in the third chapter, he is going to cover karma yoga. Then the fourth chapter, he is going to cover jnana yoga. How to integrate karma with jnana, he is going to talk about that in the fifth chapter. Then this foundation needed, because for you to contemplate, for you to meditate, right, you need a steady mind. So that science is going to talk about in the sixth chapter. Then once your mind is ready to meditate, what do I meditate upon and how do I meditate? That is a bhakti. That is something Krishna is going to talk about further from 7th to 12th chapters. Then after finishing that, some more details on this jnana he is going to cover from 13, because jnana also includes understanding of material nature. That is going to talk about from 13th to 17th chapter. And finally, he is going to talk about entire buddhi yoga again, integrating all of that and summarize the entire Bhagavad Gita again in the 18th chapter. So if you see literally this one formula that you're seeing on your screen right now is the entire Gita summarized. This is the brilliance of Krishna, that he gave the entire Bhagavad Gita in these 3 verses, 47, 48 and 49. Good that Arjuna did not understand and he asked a question, because of which we got now an elaborate understanding of the Bhagavad Gita. The great sages of the past could understand that, like Srila Prabhupada. That is why he gave the title of this chapter as the Contents of Gita Summarized. Entire Gita, the Karma Yoga, the Jnana Yoga, the Bhakti Yoga, all of that is there in this one chapter, including the science of soul that we saw in the previous section, or how to work in an attached way also, that is also mentioned in this chapter. Literally everything in the Gita is there right in this one chapter. That is why this is such a powerful chapter. One Vaishnava saint from another tradition, he would say that every person in their life, irrespective of which background you are coming from, which tradition you are coming from, which part of the world you are coming from, they have to read the Bhagavad Gita at least once. But if you cannot read the entire Bhagavad Gita at least once, at least read this chapter number 2. That is how he would emphasize, right? Because this chapter is the entire Gita in a nutshell. Of course, it requires a lot of deeper understanding to understand things in a nutshell. But Krishna is going to elaborate on each of these terms. How do I do this karma properly? How do I apply this jnana properly? What exactly is the meaning of this integration of karma on the platform of jnana? What does it mean to think about Krishna? What is this bhakti? Krishna is going to elaborate this in the entire Bhagavad Gita, and that is what we are going to see in our next week's discussion. So next week we are going to cover chapters 3, 4, and 5. So literally the main crux of this formula is going to be revealed. So again, a very, very powerful and important practical section of the Bhagavad Gita. So we're going to cover that in our next week's discussion. So with this, I'll end today's discussion and open the forum for any questions or comments that we may have. All right. Okay. So good. So let us. So let's see if you have any questions or comments. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, Tushar has a question. Go ahead, Tushar. Do you want to type it out or do you want to ask it? Okay. Meanwhile, if somebody wants to raise their hand, they could do that as well. And we discussed a lot in today's section. So it's a fairly important and a long section. Okay, I see Gaurav has a question. Gaurav, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah. Hare Krishna. The point you made about the tortoise, and where you want to kind of detach or unpleasant circumstances,
Right.
So is it more like kind of running away, where the society or people might think you're trying to run away out of fear, or detaching out of a higher emotion? So it's a kind of a mix or a thin line, where you might like how you say an ostrich puts its head in the soil, when a fear is danger is coming.
Right.
So how do you know that, how do you assess yourself that, are you trying to withdraw out of fear, or are you doing the right thing out of strength? Is it a move of strength or a move of weakness, that you're trying to do?
Well, see, it's a good question, Gaurav. In a sense, you actually answered your question. When you run away from the society out of fear, you may have moved out of the society, but have you taken the society out of you? Ask yourself this question.
Okay.
Yes or no? Have you removed the society out of your mind?
Right.
We have not, right? So like if there is a troubling scenario, if I just run away from that scenario, right? If let us say there's a trigger, let's say there's a person, a very unpleasant person, and somehow that person is always very critical of you, and you know that any interaction with that person is only going to end up in disturbing you. So now you see that person is coming to you or whatever, you have to be in a place where that person also happens to be there, right? So when you avoid going to that place, right? But this tortoise philosophy is not just about an external action of staying away from that place. Then what happens? You may have moved out of that place, but all through the day in your mind, you are interacting with that person. That person is very much there in your head. But rather, instead of you move out of that place and engage in something more productive elsewhere, so that your mind is engaged on something important, something higher, something relevant. Right? So it is not just, so tortoise philosophy is not just an action, but it also has an accompanying attitude.
And in the long run, can it,
go ahead.
In the long run, maybe even if you meet that person, it will not affect.
Exactly. Yes. Once you develop that kind of see, this is the brilliance of all Vedic techniques. There is both a cognitive and an emotive component to their solutions.
Right.
They train you both from a cognition or from the way you are perceiving and you're acting using your senses. There is a cognitive component, but it also has an emotive component which is going to make you emotionally strong internally to face up to the situation next time.
Right.
If you only run away, you are done the cognitive part, out of mind, out of sight. But does it really happen? It doesn't happen. You may be out of sight, but it is still very much in your mind, right? And this Sthita Prajna is such a person who is so emotionally so mature that the world doesn't disturb such a person. That is, of course, the perfectional stage. But I hope you got the context of what the
Right.
it is not ostrich philosophy, but tortoise philosophy has both action and attitude.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Let's see if somebody else has a question. Tushar, are you typing your question or do you want to unmute yourself?
Okay. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Pranam.
Dandavat Pranam. Go ahead.
I've heard these lectures like 3-4 times already, and every time I hear it, it's something new, so like full of wisdom. So thank you so much again for this opportunity. One question I get asked when I help people with this concept of detachment and contentment. Detachment brings contentment, or contentment takes you to detachment.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask is, and I've never been able to give a proper clarity on that. But they ask is, if you become content with your life, then where would ambition come in? Like, would you still feel ambitious? Like, because growth is such a huge part of happiness. So if I'm content, if I'm satisfied where I'm in my life, and that comes to the state of detachment, would I not grow? Like, there's always they have this like subtle fear, a certain insecurity about contentment. How would you address that, people?
Right. Yeah. If you remember, we addressed this in our class today when I gave the example of Jason Lewis.
Yeah.
I mentioned how when attachments are actually the burden that we carry. So to be detached or content, it does not mean you lack motivation. In fact, your motivation gets such clarity of thought. Otherwise, our motivations get distracted or diluted with our attachments. I have my primary purpose, but along with that, I end up creating so many other secondary purposes to distract myself. So actually, you should reply saying that a genuinely motivated person is internally detached, right? Because finally, what are we trying to detach ourselves? We're not detaching from our primary purpose. We are detaching ourselves from the things that are distracting us from the primary purpose. It is like running a marathon with 100-kilo load around you on your back. What we are telling people is that throw that unnecessary burden of attachments and you see how much your performance will improve. So this is actually, detachment is a very empowering state. It is not a debilitating state. It does not demotivate you, but actually detachment is such an empowering state. You will feel so motivated, enthused about it, right? And that is why if you see some of the most successful, even from a worldly perspective, some of the most successful people have been focused to the point where they stayed away from all the unnecessary distractions of life, and that is why today they are so successful, right? So success is impossible without distraction, and distractions or freedom from distraction is impossible without working on one's own attachments, like that. Okay, hope that clarifies. Yeah. Okay, let's RSM, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
When we were discussing the series of the 62-63 text, where we were discussing, contemplation leads to attachment leads to desire. But I have experienced certain times in life wherein I feel sometimes that if a person doesn't have a desire for something, the contemplation doesn't really happen. I don't know, please clarify if I'm going wrong. For example, if there is a desire, then, for example, if I desire to eat non-veg, then if, there will be, what do they do, those barbecues, so I would start contemplating. But if I do not have that desire, I would not contemplate at the number one point. And then also followed, not all contemplations lead to attachment. For certain set of attachments, I've realized that maybe you need certain set of knowledge, wherein, you know yourself. You know that, maybe because, life is not all about, for example, we say that ocean is deep, it's full of depth, it is full of knowledge, and, waves come and go, and it remains still. But that ocean is certainly not really good for anything.
Okay.
Because, it's deep. It can create clouds. It can create rain somewhere else. But it cannot serve like, it cannot serve like a well or a river which is flowing, which is fresh. And wherever river flows, it brings nourishment and it flourishes the places. But ocean just stands there, magnanimously, beautifully content, yes. But what good is it if it's not touching life? The life that sustains inside an ocean can sustain only in there, but for attachment is a rasa, but obviously you are not contemplating everything, you're not desiring everything. But what wrong? Why?
So let's take let's take one question at a time. Let's talk about the first thing. You said that if I just eliminate my desires itself, then where's the question of attachments coming in? And you gave the example of barbecue, right? If I have a desire to eat meat, then naturally an attachment or the next step of
contemplation,
from contemplating on meat, right? Then if I eliminate contemplation itself, then I eliminate the whole cycle, right? But the thing is, yes, you are trying to say that, okay, let me not contemplate on meat, therefore I will no more develop attachment to barbecue. But the thing is, if you are not eating anything, if you are not nourishing yourself with fruits, vegetables, vegetarian food, whatever, sattvic food that you like, if you are not nourishing yourself, then you will start craving for the things that you're not supposed to be craving. That is a principle of higher taste, which Krishna spoke about there. It is not that we are not trying to overcome our craving for meat by telling ourselves, I will not think about meat, I will not contemplate, no meat, no meat, no meat. By saying no meat, no meat, no meat, you are thinking more about meat. Rather, we are saying no to meat by feeling full and satisfied by eating the sattvic food, like that, right? And that is that state we are talking about. That when one is in that higher state, that is when the metaphor of the ocean is given. Of course, sometimes we don't have to stretch the metaphor of the ocean, but then in specifically in your context, we can take it up. That when you mentioned about ocean is of no use, but our understanding of utility many times is seen, or usefulness is very much seen from a very utilitarian view, because rivers and wells are giving water for us to drink, but what is the ocean doing? But believe it or not, if that were the case, if you remove all the oceans of this world, do you think life will sustain on this planet? They are very indirectly contributing to us, so yes, you may not see their utility directly, but they are the ones which are feeding the rivers and the wells. They are the ones that are absorbing all the CO2 on this planet. Oceans are the ones that are regulating the temperature on this planet, right? So there's such utility of the ocean, and these are all the subtle benefits that we get, right? So that's the more ecological understanding of oceans. But I hope you understood this point, that it is not about just saying that I will not desire anything. Because the nature of the soul, I think we also had a typed question. Kalpana ji had asked this question that, as you mentioned, that the soul wants happiness, or it is its nature to happy. Then what meaning does it have to follow the smart yoga in which we do not focus on the results for which we work for? Again, the meaning here is that, both your questions are two ends of the spectrum of the same confusion here. Our focus is not to give up the soul's natural ability to, it is called as rasovai saha, or anandamayobhyasat. The soul likes to experience rasa, and that pleasure seeking nature of the soul is something we are not trying to curb. That is why Krishna wants Arjuna to still engage in action, right? But then what we are trying to curb is, when the enjoyment happens with our ego in the center, that is what creates the whole materialistic action and reaction, a concept which we'll elaborate further in the next 3 chapters, right? And that egocentric action and desire is what we're trying to curtail. But the soul by nature has its own spiritual desires, and cultivating those spiritual desires is the spiritual attachment that we spoke of. That's why I defined earlier that material detachment is not possible without spiritual attachment. That you cannot say, you cannot purely say I'm spiritually attached and not be materially detached. That means you are faking. Or you cannot say I'm materially detached but I have not developed spiritual attachment. Then you are cheating yourself, right? So both both of the things have to happen together. So it is not that you are artificially just saying, oh, I'll not think about any desires. That way I'm going to solve the problem. No, it's not going to help. You cannot sustain this for a long time. Over a period of time, you'll start experiencing some vacuum and some hollowness in your heart. And you need to fill that. And that is where the spiritual attachment part comes. Otherwise, why would Krishna, in the definition of Buddhi Yoga, technically the method that you are saying is basically karma on the platform of jnana. That's it, over. Or in other words, only jnana also will give that. Why does he talk about that internal mood of bhakti? Because internally we are nourishing ourselves through those devotional understanding and the devotional emotions and sentiments. And that is what keeps us going, right? And that's why the why becomes so, when the why is not clear, why is our spiritual attachment? If that is not there, merely having the the what and the how, very soon you are going to have an accident because the steering wheel is not in the right place, like that. So I hope that, okay, yeah, you understood that answer you said. And likewise, Kalpana ji, just elaborating on the your end of the spectrum of the answer, you said then, what meaning does it have to follow smart yoga in which we do not focus on the results, right? So this very paradigm is what Krishna is trying to address, that you can be motivated without wanting to enjoy the results of your actions, right? Again, I always give, this can only happen when there is love. When only in a place where you see there is love, genuine love, you can act selflessly. And the closest thing you can experience in this world is in a mother and child relationship. A mother serves the child, takes care of the child without any expectation that, it is not that once the child grows up, okay, this is the amount of money I'm investing in the education, in the food, in the electricity bill and the water bill. So once I grow old, these will be my expenses. And this is how, I will get return on my investment. No parent, no mother ever thinks like that, right? Even in the middle of the night, she wakes up and attends to the child, understanding that it is happening at the level of love. And this is what I said earlier, that at that moment, what that mother experiences is not the burden. Oh, I have to wake up again and take care of, clean up the child. No, that's not what the mother thinks. She enjoys it, because she loves that child. This is the mode when we, with what bhakti does, when we connect, this is something we are jumping the gun and going into the later on chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. But what that, that bubble circle with bhakti, what that higher connection does is, it gives us a deeper purpose of fulfillment in life, a higher connection of loving God. And when you act at that level, just like how a mother selflessly serves, we will also develop that motivation to engage with this world not because of the world, but because of its connection to the divine. And that is the higher taste which motivates one to engage with this world, even though the world doesn't offer anything much. The world literally has nothing much to offer to us, but still one serves this world and engages with this world because internally one is saying, I'm serving my Lord, whose energies are what I'm interacting with all around me, like that. Of course, that is a higher state. That vision is something that Krishna is going to give later on in 7th, 8th, 9th chapters, like that. Okay. So that is the understanding here. There is a comment here. But mothers do expect a lovely hug in respect. Like I said, there is no 100% pure love in this world, but the mother's love is 99.99% pure. So in that 0.01, you can excuse all the mothers in the world to expecting their kids to hug them back. Okay, so please be kind to the mothers of this world for carrying that 0.01% selfishness. Okay. All right. So if there are any other questions or comments, we are over time today. My apologies for shooting over time, but this is a very important section. So we will end this discussion here. Please do reflect back. As you notice, those of you who are in the WhatsApp group, you are getting this notes as well. The reason why we give out these notes and the access to the recordings is so that you can contemplate, and you have a whole week to contemplate on this topic. And this is going to be a very important section because this theme of karma on the platform of jnana and with the mood and intention of bhakti is a theme that will continue for the rest of the Bhagavad Gita. And we're going to repeatedly come back to this formula again and again and again. So please internalize this formula and see you all next week. So let's now conclude with our closing mantras. So joining your palms together. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all very much. See you in our next week's session. We have to cover 3 important chapters, 3, 4 and 5. So please make sure that you join us next week. Hare Krishna.